What happens when a man who swore he'd never love again opens his door on a rainy night and finds a billionaire in tears begging him not to leave her alone? Nolan Hayes wasn't looking for anyone. He had his daughter, his routine, and a grief he'd made peace with. That was enough. Or so he told himself. But the night Avery Sterling knocked on his door, mascara down her cheeks, voice barely holding, everything he'd carefully built around himself cracked open. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she was worth billions. All he saw was someone who needed a place to land, and without thinking, he stepped aside and let her in. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. The rain came in hard that Tuesday. Not the kind of rain that eases in gentle and polite, the kind that shows up like bad news, all at once, drumming against windows and flooding gutters before anyone's had a chance to grab an umbrella. By 4:30 in the afternoon, Maplewood Court was mostly empty. The neighbors had retreated inside. The parking lot shimmered under a skin of water. And in apartment 4B, Nolan Hayes was standing at the stove in a faded gray t-shirt, stirring a pot of tomato soup with one hand and holding a crayon drawing up to the light with the other. "Is that supposed to be me?" he asked. His daughter Lily was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter, something he'd told her not to do at least 40 times, swinging her feet and watching him with enormous brown eyes. "It's you and me at the park," she said, very seriously. "Except I made your hair bigger because it was blowing in the wind that day." Nolan looked at the figure on the paper. The hair was indeed enormous. It looked less like wind and more like a small explosion. "Very accurate, he said, setting the drawing carefully on the counter beside her. "You've really captured something." "I know." She picked up a red crayon and went back to work. "Miss Patterson says I have an artistic eye." "Miss Patterson is right." He turned back to the soup, stirred it again, watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling and thought for a moment about absolutely nothing. Just the soup, just the sound of rain, just Lily's feet tapping against the cabinet door in an irregular rhythm that should have been annoying and somehow wasn't. This was the life he had built. Small, deliberate, carefully maintained. Tomato soup on rainy Tuesdays, crayons on the counter, a routine so practiced it had become a kind of armor. Not the kind that kept things out, exactly, but the kind that kept him moving forward when moving forward was the only option available. Lily had been 3 when her mother died, 5 years ago now. Long enough that the sharpest edges of it had worn down to something duller, something Nolan could carry without flinching every minute of every day. Short enough that certain things, a particular laugh, the way rain smelled, the sight of a woman's dark hair, still had the power to knock the breath out of him if he wasn't careful. He was always careful. He ladled soup into 2 bowls, cut Lily's grilled cheese into triangles because she refused to eat it any other way, and set everything on the small kitchen table that was perpetually covered in art supplies, permission slips, and at least 3 missing library books. He cleared a space for the bowls, found 2 relatively clean spoons, called it a win. "Wash your hands," he said. "They're not dirty." "You've been handling crayons for 2 hours." "Crayons aren't dirty." "Lily." She hopped off the counter with the sigh of someone being asked to walk through fire rather than walk 6 feet to the sink, washed her hands with theatrical suffering, and climbed into her chair. She pulled her bowl toward her, picked up her spoon, and dipped it into the soup with the focused concentration of a surgeon. Nolan sat across from her. Outside, the rain intensified, rattling the window pane in its frame. He listened to it, thought about the leak he'd been meaning to have looked at above the bathroom ceiling, thought about the parent-teacher conference next week, thought about whether he'd remembered to pay the electric bill. He was good at thinking about practical things. He had gotten very good at it over the years. It left less room for everything else. They ate in the comfortable quiet that had its own particular texture. Not empty, not strained, just easy. Lily told him about a boy in her class named Desmond who had eaten an entire eraser on a dare and then denied it even though everyone had seen him do it. Nolan listened with appropriate gravity and said that eating erasers was generally inadvisable. Lily agreed but admitted that Desmond was very brave. It was nearly 6 when the knock came. Soft at first. Hesitant. The kind of knock that apologizes for itself. Nolan almost didn't hear it over the rain. He set down his spoon and listened, heard it again. 3 quick taps, barely audible. He glanced at Lily, who had stopped eating and was looking at the front door with the wide, unself-conscious curiosity of an 8-year-old. "Someone's at the door," she announced. "Yeah." He pushed back from the table. "Maybe it's Mrs. Kowalski returning our casserole dish," Lily said thoughtfully. "She's had it since February." "It's a possibility." He crossed the living room, stepped over Lily's backpack and a stuffed elephant named Gerald, and pulled the door open. The woman standing in the hallway was not Mrs. Kowalski. She was tall, nearly 5'8", in a cream silk blouse that the rain had partially destroyed, dark trousers, and one high heel. Just one. She was holding the other in her hand, the strap broken clean off. Her dark hair was plastered to the side of her face. Her mascara had tracked 2 thin lines down her cheeks, and her eyes, dark brown, almost black, enormous, were wet in a way that had nothing to do with rain. She was, objectively, one of the most beautiful women Nolan had ever seen. She was also clearly in the middle of falling apart. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, and her voice was low and careful, like she was using a great deal of effort to keep it steady. "I know this is... I live next door, 4C. I moved in 2 months ago. I don't think we've properly met." "We haven't," Nolan said. He'd noticed her in passing. Hard not to. The kind of woman who moved through a space and rearranged it somehow just by being there. "Nolan, 4B. Avery." She swallowed. Her grip tightened on the broken heel. "I'm really sorry to bother you. She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked somewhere past his shoulder at the middle distance. "I don't have anyone to call. My assistant is in London. It doesn't matter. I didn't want to be alone tonight, and I didn't know where else to go, and I saw your light on, and I'm sorry. I know this is strange. She started to turn away. "Hey." The word came out before Nolan had made any kind of decision about it. "Don't... Wait. Come in." She turned back and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between relief and embarrassment and something older and more complicated underneath both. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." He stepped back and held the door wider. "Come in anyway." She hesitated for one more second. Then she crossed the threshold, and Nolan Hayes had no way of knowing, couldn't have possibly known, that in that moment, the quiet and careful life he had spent 5 years building was already beginning to change into something else entirely. But he got her a towel. That was the first thing. She stood just inside the door, dripping onto the welcome mat, holding her broken shoe, looking around the apartment with an expression that Nolan couldn't tell was polite or genuine. He went to the bathroom, grabbed the least frayed towel he owned, which was still pretty frayed because he kept forgetting to buy new ones, and brought it back to her. "Thank you," she said quietly, and pressed it to her face. From the kitchen doorway, Lily appeared. She stood there in her socks and her dinosaur sweater, soup spoon still in hand, studying the woman in the hallway with the unblinking assessment that only small children and cats can truly execute without shame. "You only have one shoe," Lily said. Avery lowered the towel. She looked at Lily. Something happened in her expression. A softening, quick and involuntary. "The other one broke." "That's bad luck." "It really is." "Did you cry because of the shoe?" "Lily," Nolan said, "I'm asking." "She doesn't have to answer that." Lily considered this, apparently decided it was fair, and shifted her attention to Avery's mascara tracks with scientific interest. "You can wash your face in our bathroom," she offered. "Dad has good soap. It smells like cedar." Avery let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that might have cracked into something else if she'd let it. She caught it, held it, pressed the towel back to her face for a moment. "That's very kind," she said, and meant it in a way that landed heavier than the words themselves. Nolan looked at his daughter. "Can you go check on the soup? Make sure the burner's off?" "It's off. I watched you turn it off." Lily. The specific tone. She recognized it. With one final evaluating look at Avery, she padded back to the kitchen. "I'm sorry about her," Nolan said, then immediately felt bad about it. "Actually, no. She was right to offer. The bathroom's down the hall. Take whatever time you need." Avery nodded. She walked down the short hallway carefully. the one remaining heel clicking against the hardwood, the other foot in its damp stocking, and disappeared into the bathroom. Nolan heard the water running. He stood in his living room and exhaled slowly. He looked around the space as if seeing it through someone else's eyes. The cluttered bookshelves, the crayon marks on the lower third of one wall that he'd been meaning to paint over for 2 years. The secondhand couch with the throw blanket that Lily had claimed as her permanent property. The photos on the wall, him and Lily at the beach, Lily's first day of school, a couple of older ones he'd kept because removing them felt like something he wasn't ready to define. It wasn't much. It was everything. He went back to the kitchen, turned off the stove. It was already off, Lily had been right, and started thinking about whether he had enough soup for 3. He did have enough soup for 3. Just barely. When Avery came out of the bathroom, her face was clean, the mascara was gone, and she'd taken her hair down and retied it in a simple knot at the back of her neck. She was still in the wet silk blouse, still carrying the broken shoe. But she looked less like someone in the middle of a crisis and more like someone who had just survived one, which it turned out was more or less the accurate description. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the third bowl on the table. "You don't have to feed me," she said. "It's tomato soup and a grilled cheese triangle," Nolan said. "It's not a commitment." Lily patted the chair beside her. "You can sit here. That's usually where Dad's stuff goes, but he can put it somewhere else." Nolan moved a stack of papers off the chair without ceremony and gestured to it. Avery sat down. Lily handed her a spoon. Avery accepted it and looked at the bowl in front of her and then at the two of them across the table. Father and daughter, in their everyday clothes, in their small, warm kitchen, with its crayon drawings on the refrigerator and its stack of permission slips on the counter. And for a moment, she just looked, very quietly, like she was trying to memorize something. "Thank you," she said. Came out different from the first time she'd said it. Deeper, less reflexive. "Cedar soap and tomato soup," Lily said agreeably. "We're full service." Nolan pressed his mouth flat to keep from laughing. They ate. The rain kept on outside. Lily told Avery about Desmond and the eraser, which Avery received with the same gravity the story deserved, and then told Lily about a time she had eaten an entire jar of peanut butter in one sitting at age 9 on a dare from her cousin. "Did you get sick?" Lily asked. "Spectacularly." "Was it worth it?" Avery thought about it. "No, but I won the dare. So sort of." Lily absorbed this and nodded like she was filing it away for future reference. Nolan watched the two of them and felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Kind of quiet fullness. Not happiness exactly. Something more complicated and more honest than that. More like the awareness that right now, in this moment, things were okay. That this moment was genuinely, unremarkably okay. He hadn't noticed how long it had been since he'd felt that without having to work for it. After dinner, Lily disappeared to her room with a picture book and the stuffed elephant, Gerald. Nolan made coffee. Actual coffee, not the instant kind he usually subjected himself to on weeknights, and brought 2 mugs to the living room. Avery was sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her, her broken shoe set carefully on the floor beside her like a small exhibit. He handed her a mug. She wrapped both hands around it. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked. Not pressing, just leaving the door open. She was quiet for a moment, looked down into her coffee. "It was a date," she said finally. "A first date. A friend set it up. I don't usually do setups. I've learned my lesson about setups, but she was insistent, and I thought, okay, try something different." She paused. He was very polished, very charming. We were at this restaurant downtown, nice place, and about 45 minutes in, he looked at me and said. She stopped again. Her jaw tightened slightly. He said that women like me were exhausting to be with, that we spent so much energy building our careers that we forgot to actually become someone worth knowing. The room was quiet except for the rain. Nolan said nothing for a moment. "That's a terrible thing to say to someone." "I know." She said it quickly, almost offensively, like she'd been reminding herself of it all evening. "I know it is, and I know he's wrong. I do know that." A small, humorless breath. "It's just that he isn't the first person to say it. Different words, same shape. And I've been told some version of that enough times that somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling obviously wrong and started feeling like a question I couldn't answer." Nolan held his mug and thought about that. The particular cruelty of hearing something enough times that you start auditing yourself for evidence of it. That's not a character flaw, he said. That's just what happens when people keep throwing rocks at the same spot. She looked at him. Eventually you're not sure anymore if there was something there to begin with, he said, or if they just made a hole. She was very still for a moment. Then she looked back down at her coffee. Yeah, she said softly. That's exactly what it is. There was a comfortable beat of silence. Not uncomfortable, not filled with the pressure to perform or explain. Just the rain and the coffee and two people sitting in the same room. You said you've been in the building 2 months, Nolan said. What brought you to Maplewood Court? He caught himself. He'd looked her up in approximately 30 seconds on his phone while she was in the bathroom. The search results had been somewhat startling. Sterling Group, Forbes list, the kind of wealth that had its own Wikipedia subheading. This isn't exactly the typical billionaire habitat. She said it without bitterness, just a dry recognition. I was going to say neighborhood for someone with a driver and a personal assistant in London, but sure. That got a real smile out of her. Small, but real. It changed her face considerably, softened it, made her look younger, made her look like a person rather than a magazine cover. My assistant booked it, she said. I had a project in this part of the city for 6 months, and I told her I didn't want a hotel. I wanted something that felt like an actual place, somewhere with neighbors. She glanced around his apartment and then back at him with a wry expression. She apparently took me very literally. Do you regret it? She considered. Depends on the night. A beat. Not tonight. Nolan nodded slowly. They sat for another hour, maybe more. He lost track of time, which almost never happened to him, he who scheduled everything in 15-minute increments. They talked about the neighborhood, about the corner bakery that had the best scones but the slowest service in the city, about Lily's school 2 blocks over. Avery asked about Lily with a carefulness that he noticed and appreciated. Not prying, just genuinely curious. He told her a few things. Not everything. Enough. He did not mention Claire, not yet. Some things lived in a specific part of him that required a specific kind of trust before he opened it, and that trust took longer than one rainy evening to build. When Avery finally said she should go home, it was close to 10 o'clock. She stood, picked up her broken shoe, and looked around for her bag, which she'd left by the door. He walked her there. She put her hand on the door handle and then paused, and for a moment she looked very young and very alone in a way that had nothing to do with money or apartments or whether her assistant was in London. I don't usually do this, she said. Show up at strangers' doors. I know. I'm not. I want you to know I'm not. She stopped. Tried again. This isn't something I do. I didn't think it was. She looked at him for a second, measuring something. Then she nodded, once, small. Thank you, Nolan. The way she said his name, like she'd been practicing how to mean it. Anytime, he said, and meant it in the moderate human way, not as a blank check, not as a romantic gesture, just as the truth. She stepped out into the hall. She walked the 6 feet to 4C in one heel and one stocking foot and let herself in without looking back. Nolan stood at his open door for a moment, listening to the rain and the quiet of the building settling around him. He went back inside, cleaned up the kitchen, checked on Lily, who had fallen asleep with Gerald tucked under her chin and the picture book folded open across her face. He extracted the book carefully, pulled the blanket up around her shoulders, and stood there in the doorway for a moment in the dim light. She looked so much like her mother sometimes that it still cost him something to look directly at it. He went to bed, lay in the dark listening to the rain gradually ease. Thought about Avery Sterling sitting on his second-hand couch with her broken shoe on the floor, wrapped around a coffee mug, saying that's exactly what it is in a voice that sounded like someone finally being allowed to put down something heavy. He thought about how long it had been since he'd had a real conversation with another adult. Not about school pickups or work logistics or the neighborhood email chain about the parking situation, but an actual conversation. The kind where you said something honest and the other person understood it without you having to translate it first. He was asleep before he could decide what to do with any of that. The next morning, Lily found a small envelope under their door. She brought it to the breakfast table and held it up with the solemn ceremony of someone who understood the significance of unexpected mail. "It has your name on it," she told Nolan, who was making eggs and had not yet had coffee and was operating at approximately 60% capacity. He took the envelope. Inside was a note card, cream-colored, heavy stock. The handwriting was precise and small. "Nolan, thank you for last night, for the soup, the cedar soap, the company. I know I arrived a mess and you didn't make me feel like one. That was generous. Avery. P.S. Please tell Lily that Desmond sounds like a future politician." Nolan read it twice, set it on the counter. "What does it say?" Lily asked. "She says thank you." "For what?" "Dinner, the bathroom, being nice." Lily thought about this while stirring her orange juice, which she always stirred for some reason he had never been able to determine. "She was sad," Lily said, not as a question. "Yeah." "Is she better now?" Nolan looked at the note card on the counter, thought about the expression on Avery's face when she'd said you don't have to do that, the reflexive deflection of someone who expected not to be let in. "I think she's working on it," he said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. She went back to her eggs. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale morning light was pushing through the kitchen window, hitting the stack of Lily's drawings on the counter, picking out the colors. The crayon portrait with the exploding hair, the park in summer, the two figures, one tall, one small, standing beside each other in a green field. Nolan poured himself a coffee, read the note card one more time, put it in the drawer where he kept the important things. Lily's first school photo, the utility warranties, the takeout menus he never used but couldn't throw away. He went back to making eggs. The building around him was quiet. 4C was silent. Whatever was happening next door, whether she'd slept, whether she was already on the phone with London, whether she'd cried again or made herself stop, he didn't know. But the drawer was a little more full than it had been yesterday, and the apartment felt very slightly less like something sealed. He wasn't sure what to make of that yet. He figured he probably didn't have to decide right now. 3 days passed before Nolan saw her again. He wasn't counting. He just happened to notice. In the way you notice the absence of something you didn't realize you'd been listening for, that 4C had been very quiet. No heels in the hallway, no sound of a phone call bleeding through the shared wall at odd hours, which he'd grown faintly accustomed to in the 2 months since she'd moved in. Just silence and the occasional creak of the building settling into itself the way old buildings do, like a person shifting their weight. On Thursday morning, he nearly knocked on her door. He was standing right there in the hallway with Lily's backpack over his shoulder, and Lily herself attempting to put on her left shoe while hopping on her right foot, and he stopped in front of 4C for a half second and then kept walking, because he didn't have a reason to knock, and he wasn't going to invent one. It wasn't his business. She was a grown woman who ran a billion-dollar company. She didn't need him checking in like she was a houseplant he was responsible for. Lily got her shoe on in the elevator. She sat down on the elevator floor to do it, which was a whole thing, but they made it to school on time, which was the actual goal. He was back in the building by 8:45, his first remote call not until 10. He made coffee, sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, stared at the spreadsheet on his screen for approximately 4 minutes without absorbing any of it. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, and made a second cup of coffee, put it in a to-go cup, walked out into the hallway. He knocked on 4C. Nothing for a moment. Then footsteps, quick, light, and the door opened. Avery was in running clothes, not the silk blouse and tailored trousers of the other night. Leggings, a worn athletic jacket with a small tear near the left cuff, her hair pulled up in a messy bun that was mostly bun and slightly less messy than it suggested. She had her phone in one hand and a highlighter in the other, and the look on her face was the specific look of someone who had been doing 6 things simultaneously and had just been interrupted in the middle of all of them. She saw him. The look shifted. "Hi," she said, a little surprised. "Hi." He held up the to-go cup. "I made extra. Didn't know if you'd had any." She looked at the cup. Something moved through her expression. Quick, unguarded, like a door opening and closing before she could decide whether to leave it open. "I've had 3, she said. But I'll take a fourth. She stepped back. Come in? He hadn't intended to come in. He'd intended to hand over the cup and leave, a clean, minimal gesture with no implications. But she was already stepping back and he was already following, because that was apparently what happened when Avery Sterling stepped back and made room. Her apartment was the same floor plan as his, but felt nothing like his. Not because it was decorated expensively. It wasn't, or at least it didn't look like it was trying to be. It was that everything in it was very deliberately chosen. A low bookshelf packed tight, a wide desk near the window covered in documents, and 2 open laptops and a legal pad with handwriting so small it looked like a different language. A single large print on the wall, abstract, dark greens and charcoal gray, that Nolan didn't know enough about art to evaluate, but that made him feel something bleak and stirring at the same time, which seemed like it was probably the point. What surprised him was the corner, a small armchair near the window with a blanket thrown over the arm and a stack of novels on the floor beside it. Dog-eared, cracked spines, the kind of books that had been read rather than displayed. It was the most personal thing in the room. It looked like where she actually lived, as opposed to where she worked, which was everywhere else. Nice place, he said, because he had to say something. It's a rental, she said, which was not quite a response. She took the coffee cup, pried off the lid, added it back crooked, leaned against her kitchen counter and looked at him with the direct assessing quality he was starting to recognize as just how she looked at things. Not unfriendly, just honest. Like she didn't see the point of looking sideways at something when you could look straight at it. I wanted to make sure you were okay, he said. Since the other night. I'm okay. A half-beat. I was embarrassed for a few days. I'm not great at... She made a gesture with her hand that seemed to indicate showing up at someone's door in pieces. I don't usually let people see that. It was a moment of weakness. It wasn't weakness. I know that's what you're supposed to say. I'm not saying it because I'm supposed to. He kept his voice even. You went through something hard and you didn't want to be alone and you asked for help. That's not weakness. That's just being a person. She held his gaze for a beat. Then she looked down at her coffee. I canceled 3 meetings that week, she said. I told myself it was because of the deadline on the Harmon project, but I think mostly I just didn't want to sit across from anyone who might notice something was off and start asking questions. Did anyone notice? My assistant. A short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She didn't ask questions. She just started putting green tea in my calendar reminders instead of the usual time slots. Very passive-aggressive. Very effective. He smiled at that. She caught it, and something in her expression eased. Just slightly, the way a room eases when someone opens a window. They talked for 40 minutes. He missed the beginning of his 10 o'clock call and had to send an apologetic message from the hallway on his way back, but he couldn't bring himself to care about it the way he normally would have. Some things recalibrated without your permission. That was Thursday. By the following Wednesday, they had established something that neither of them had named or formally agreed to. A loose, tentative routine that existed mostly in the margins of their actual lives. A coffee on the way out in the morning, occasionally. A knock in the evening if one of them had seen the other's light on. It wasn't planned. It also wasn't accidental. Lily noticed immediately, because Lily noticed everything. Is Avery coming over tonight? She asked on a Wednesday, climbing into the car after school with her backpack half unzipped and her left pigtail mostly unraveled. I don't know, Nolan said. Mom, why? Because I want to show her my new drawing. It's a horse. I've been working on the legs because legs are hard. Legs are hard, he agreed. Does Avery like horses? I genuinely don't know. You should ask her. I'll mention it. Lily re-zipped her backpack with the focused determination of someone completing a significant task. She came over 4 times last week, she said, in the tone of someone reporting an important data point. 3 times. 4. Tuesday you made her stay for dinner twice. That was 1 dinner and 1, He stopped. She stayed for dinner twice last week. Yes, that's a lot. Lily. I'm not saying it's bad. She looked out the window at the passing street. I like when she comes over. She helped me with the horse drawing. She knows how to draw horses. Does she? She grew up near farms, she said, in Ohio somewhere. A pause. She said she used to draw horses on her homework instead of doing the homework, and her teachers got mad, but she did it anyway. Nolan glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She told you that? When you were on the phone, we talked a lot. Lily picked at a loose thread on her jacket cuff with academic interest. She's different than I thought. What did you think? I thought she was like the ladies on TV, the ones in the fancy offices who don't smile a lot and carry the big purses. She does carry a fairly large purse. But she's not like that on the inside. Lily said it with the absolute confidence of someone who had made a thorough assessment. She's actually kind of like us, except with more money and a nicer apartment. Nolan didn't answer that. He pulled into their parking spot, turned off the engine, and sat for a second. She is coming over tonight? Lily asked again, gathering her things. I'll ask her, he said. She was. She brought takeout, Thai food, 3 bags of it, far too much for 3 people, and spread it across their small kitchen table with the unself-conscious generosity of someone who had never fully recalibrated her sense of portion to the size of her current living situation. There were 4 different curries. There was mango sticky rice. There were spring rolls that Lily immediately claimed territorial rights over. This is a lot of food, Nolan said, not complaining. I didn't know what everyone liked, Avery said, which was the kind of logic that only made sense if you had a personal assistant who could order everything on the menu without blinking. I like all of it, Lily said, already reaching for a spring roll. Don't worry, we'll eat it. They did eat most of it, the sticky rice especially, which disappeared faster than seemed physically possible given that one of the 3 participants was an 8-year-old. After dinner, Lily sat up at the coffee table with her drawing supplies and pulled out the horse in progress for Avery to evaluate. Avery sat on the floor cross-legged, not on the couch, on the actual floor, her heels abandoned near the door, and looked at the drawing with genuine attention. The legs are better, she said. I practiced. It shows. See here. She took the pencil Lily offered and sketched something lightly in the corner of the page. The back legs always bend different from the front ones. People forget that. Dad always draws stick figures, Lily said. He says he's not artistic. He's not wrong, Nolan said from the kitchen, where he was doing dishes. He has other skills, Avery said, in a tone that was diplomatic enough that Lily accepted it, and Nolan raised an eyebrow at his own reflection in the dark window above the sink. He finished the dishes and came back to the living room and found the 2 of them still on the floor, the horse drawing now substantially improved, Lily talking about a story she was writing in a notebook. A story about a girl who found a dragon in her school gym that only she could see. Avery was listening with the kind of attention that wasn't performance. She asked questions, real ones. What kind of dragon? Did it breathe fire or was it a different kind? Was the gym teacher suspicious? Lily answered all of them with great seriousness, as if she had been waiting for someone to take the appropriate level of interest. Nolan sat on the couch and watched them, and thought about the way Lily had said she's kind of like us in the car. The casual certainty of it. Children were perceptive in a direction that adults had mostly learned to distrust, straight down to what something was, without all the intermediary steps of what it looked like and what it was supposed to be. He was beginning to think his daughter was right. It was almost 9 when Avery looked at the clock on the wall and made the expression of someone who had lost track of time and was mildly alarmed by it. I have a 7 a.m. call with Singapore tomorrow, she said, starting to get up from the floor. Lily immediately looked tragic. You can come back, she told Avery, as if this was a thing she had the authority to invite unilaterally, which, in her view, she clearly did. We're here basically always. Lily, Nolan said. We are. Avery looked at Lily with that expression she got, the one that was quickly becoming familiar to Nolan, the quick, involuntary softening. I know, she said. I'll be back. She meant it the way Nolan had meant any time, not as a script, but as a real thing. He could tell the difference now. He wasn't sure when he'd learned to read her well enough to tell the difference, but he had, and the awareness of that sat in his chest like something he hadn't decided how to categorize yet. He walked her to the door. Lily had already migrated back to her notebook, Dragon story resuming. At the door, Avery paused with her hand on the handle. She kept doing this fractional pause, like she was always about to say something and then reconsidering. Thank you, she said, for the... He'd lost count now, many times. You bought 4 curries and mango sticky rice, he said. I think we're past the thank you phase. Old habit. I know. She looked at him. The hallway light was doing something particular to the angles of her face, and he looked away first, which he hadn't intended and which he noted with the mild, unsettled awareness of someone who has discovered a new blind spot. Good luck with Singapore, he said. Thanks. They're going to be difficult. You'll be fine. You don't know that. I know you argued with your assistant for 10 minutes last Tuesday about the wording in a contract clause, and you were right about all of it, he said. Singapore doesn't know what's coming. She smiled. The real one, the one that changed her face. You weren't even on that call. Your voice carries through walls. A beat. Not in a bad way. She shook her head, still smiling, and went back to 4C. He stood at his door for a moment, the way he had that first rainy night, listening to the building settle. Lily's pen scratched against paper in the living room. The refrigerator hummed. He went back inside and did not think too hard about anything. That was the deal he was making with himself. Not to think too hard. The problem with deals like that is that life has its own timeline, and it doesn't much care about the ones you've established for yourself. The following Saturday, something happened that he hadn't planned for, and that cracked something open in him before he had a chance to brace for it. It started as an ordinary morning. He took Lily to her Saturday art class, a 45-minute thing at the community center 4 blocks over that she'd been attending since September, and that mostly produced works of surprising emotional complexity for an 8-year-old. He'd arranged to meet his friend Marcus afterward for coffee. Marcus was a former colleague, now a high school history teacher, one of those people who had managed to remain genuinely easy to be around over 15 years of friendship without becoming boring, which was rarer than people gave it credit for. They sat at the bakery on Clement Street, the one with the good scones and the slow service that he'd told Avery about. Marcus was telling him about a student who had written an entire history essay about the French Revolution from the perspective of a croissant, which Marcus had given an A- on the grounds that it was historically inaccurate but showed exceptional commitment. The croissant witnessed the storming of the Bastille? Nolan asked. The croissant was at the storming of the Bastille, Marcus said. It had opinions. What were the opinions? Largely negative. Croissants, it turns out, are royalists. Nolan laughed. A real one, the kind that came from somewhere low in his chest, rather than the polite, managed kind. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You seem different, Marcus said. I'm not. Lighter, like something got unstuck. He stirred his coffee. Marcus had known him since before Claire, through Claire, and after Claire, which meant he had a context that most people didn't. He used it sparingly. It was one of the things Nolan valued about him. You meet someone? No. That was fast. Because the answer's no. The answer took a second, though. Nolan looked at his scone. There's a neighbor, he said, and then immediately regretted the phrasing, which made it sound much more significant than he meant it to. Okay. It's nothing. She's just... We've been talking. She's become... I don't know. Lily likes her. Lily also likes a cartoon about a dog who solves crimes, Marcus said. Lily's affection is genuine, but not always illuminating. She's smart, the neighbor, and she's... He stopped, tried to find the word for what Avery was that wasn't the wrong word. She came over one night in kind of rough shape. We've just been friendly since. It's not a thing. Okay, Marcus said again, in the exact same tone, which meant something completely different the second time. Don't, Nolan said. I didn't say anything. You said okay twice with 2 totally different meanings. I'm very economical with my vocabulary. Marcus picked up his scone. When's the last time you let anyone new in, Nolan? Actually in. Not just through the door. Nolan didn't answer because the honest answer was 5 years, and he didn't feel like saying it out loud in a bakery on a Saturday morning. I'm not saying it has to be something, Marcus said in a gentler register. I'm saying maybe let it be whatever it actually is without deciding in advance that it's nothing. Nolan was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to do that anymore. I know. Marcus wasn't unkind about it. You will, though, yeah, You remember how? He picked Lily up from art class at 11. She was carrying a painting, large for her, of a field with a horse in the distance, blue sky, very confident brushstrokes. It's Avery's horse, she said, holding it carefully at arm's length to avoid smudging. Avery's horse? The one we were drawing. I painted it for her. She looked at the painting with critical assessment. The legs are better. They are, he said. And they were. He hadn't planned any of what happened next, which was maybe why it hit him the way it did. They went home. He started lunch. Lily went next door to give Avery the painting, which she had decided to do independently and without consultation. He heard the knock, heard the door open, heard Lily's voice, high and earnest, and then Avery's voice, low and warm, and then a sound he had to stop what he was doing to place. Avery was laughing, not a polished laugh, not a social laugh, a real one, surprised out of her, slightly unhinged, the kind that didn't care how it sounded. It came through the wall clear as anything. Nolan stood in his kitchen with a spatula in his hand and felt something move through him that he hadn't been prepared for. Not the laugh itself exactly, more what it meant. That she was happy, right now, in this moment, because of his daughter, because of something pure and simple and unasked for. He put the spatula down, stood very still. Claire had laughed like that, like she didn't care how it sounded, like laughter was something that happened to you rather than something you produced. He hadn't let himself think about that laugh in a long time because it went straight to the part of him that was still, under everything, not entirely intact. He thought about it now, and it hurt, but it hurt differently than he expected. Less like a wound being reopened, and more like pressure easing somewhere. Like the two things could coexist, the love he still carried for Claire and the sound of someone new laughing on the other side of a wall. He hadn't known those two things could coexist. He went back to making lunch. His hands were a little unsteady, and then they weren't. Lily came back 10 minutes later, beaming. She cried a little, Lily announced, happy crying. Yeah? She said it was the best painting anyone had ever given her. Lily climbed onto the counter. He opened his mouth and she preemptively moved to a chair. I think she meant it. Sometimes adults say that and don't mean it. She meant it. I think so too. She's coming for dinner on Friday, Lily added with the casual authority of someone who had handled the scheduling herself. I invited her. She said yes. I said you'd make the pasta with the olives. Nolan stared at his daughter. You volunteered my pasta? It's very good pasta. Lily, you can't just... She said yes already. It would be rude to uninvite her. There was, he had to admit, a kind of airtight logic to this. Fine, he said. Great. She reached for an apple from the fruit bowl. Also, I told her about Mama. The spatula went still in his hand. What? He said. Lily was already biting into the apple, not noticing his stillness. I said we live here just us two because Mama died when I was little. I didn't say a lot, just so she knows. She looked at him with the clear, direct eyes of an 8-year-old who has learned to talk about hard things with a directness that adults spend years trying to recover. Is that okay? Nolan made himself breathe normally. Yeah, he said. That's okay. She didn't act weird about it. Some people act weird. Lily took another bite. She just said she was sorry and that your mama sounds like she was a good person for raising you so well. And then she asked what her name was. He was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? Claire. Lily said it the way she always did, with a kind of careful tenderness, the way you carry something fragile that you've learned to carry properly. I said her name was Claire, and she had a good laugh. She looked at him. I said that because you always say that she had a good laugh. Nolan had to look away for a second at the window. At the street outside, ordinary and sunlit and indifferent to whatever was happening in this kitchen. He blinked a couple of times, made his face do the thing it had learned to do. Yeah, he said. She did. Lily finished her apple in silence, which was its own kind of kindness, like she had, at 8, already developed an instinct for when her father needed a minute without requiring him to ask for one. She took her core to the trash, rinsed her hands, and went to her room, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the smell of garlic and olive oil and the complicated feeling of being known in a direction he hadn't expected. Friday came. He made the pasta, the one with the olives and the capers and the crushed tomatoes and the slab of parmesan that Lily considered obligatory. He made it properly, not the weeknight version, not the I forgot about dinner version, the real version. He was not going to examine too closely why he was making the real version. Avery arrived at 6:30 on the dot. She brought wine, a bottle of something that probably cost more than his groceries for the week, which he accepted without comment and without looking up the price, because he'd decided that was going to be a thing they just didn't make into a thing. She also brought a children's chapter book she'd seen in the window of the bookstore on Haverford, something about a girl who found a dragon, which made Lily's eyes go enormous. "I didn't know it was a real book," Lily breathed, turning it over in her hands like it was archaeology. "I thought it might be research," Avery said. Lily immediately sat down on the hallway floor to start reading it, right there, on the floor of the hallway. "You can take it to the living room," Nolan said. "I'm already here," Lily said, without looking up. He and Avery exchanged a look over the top of his daughter's head. It was the specific look of two people who found the same thing funny without having to say why, and the ease of it landed somewhere quiet and unexpected in his chest. Dinner was loud. Lily had opinions about the pasta, specifically that there needed to be more olives. There were never enough olives. Why were there always so few olives? And Avery backed her on this, which Nolan considered a betrayal, and said so. "You're outnumbered," Avery told him. "It's my recipe. The people have spoken. There are two of you and you live together," he said, gesturing between them. "I'm being lobbied." Avery and Lily looked at each other with the solemnity of people who had just been identified as a coalition. "He knows," Lily said. "He does," Avery agreed. Nolan put more olives in the pasta. He would not give them the satisfaction of letting them see him try to hide the smile. The evening moved the way good evenings did, not building toward anything, not performing itself, just existing. After dinner, Lily read 3 chapters of the Dragon Book aloud to both of them, which Avery listened to with genuine focus and Nolan listened to with one ear while he cleaned up, and which ended at the bottom of page 42 with a cliffhanger that Lily announced was unacceptable and then immediately fell asleep mid-complaint. He got her to bed. Dragon Book on the nightstand, Gerald tucked in, blanket arranged. He stood in the doorway as he always did, and there was something different about it tonight, something that made the ritual feel held rather than just habitual. He wasn't sure if that was good or just significant. He came back to the living room. Avery was sitting on the couch, her shoes off, her feet pulled up, the wine glass held loosely. She looked like someone who had lowered something she'd been carrying. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "You keep thanking me. You keep giving me things worth thanking you for." He sat in the armchair across from her. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling. "Lily told me about Claire," Avery said, not hesitant, not braced, just honest. "I know. I didn't want to bring it up if you didn't want to." She looked at him. "But I've been thinking about it, about carrying that and doing this," and she gestured at the apartment, at the space around them, all of it. "It takes a lot to build something that feels this warm after something that hard." He looked at his hands. "I didn't build it," he said. "Lily built it. I just kept the lights on." "That's not nothing. Keeping the lights on isn't nothing." He didn't answer for a moment. "You said something when you were telling me about the date," he said, "that you'd been told enough times that you were hard to love that it stopped feeling obviously wrong." She was very still. "I think I did something similar," he said. "Decided at some point that loving someone again would mean, I don't know, diminishing it. What was there before? Like, there was only a certain amount of it, and it had already been used." The room was very quiet. "Does it feel like that now?" she asked. He looked at her across the small space of his living room. This woman who had shown up on his doorstep in tears and one shoe and had somehow, without drama or declaration, become the person his daughter painted horses for and saved dinner seats for and consulted on the dragon leg anatomy of fictional chapter book illustrations. "Less than it did," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked down at her wine glass. "I'm scared of this," she said quietly. Not to him, not quite. More to the room. Not you specifically, just this, the feeling of it. I've been here before thinking a thing was safe, and then she pressed her lips together. I know, he said. I'm not saying I'm not. She made a frustrated, small sound. I don't have the right words for this. You don't need words for it, he said. It can just be what it is. She looked at him then, really looked, the way she had that first night in the hallway, like she was deciding something, like the assessment was real and the outcome wasn't certain. Okay, she said. Just that. He nodded. She nodded. They sat in the quiet apartment, two imperfect, careful, somewhat frightened adults, with Lily asleep down the hall and Gerald tucked in and the dragon book waiting on the nightstand, and nothing about it was clean or simple or resolved. But it was real. And right now, real was more than enough. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:47, while Avery was still in the armchair by the window with her first cup of coffee and a contract she'd been trying to read for 20 minutes without actually reading it. She almost missed it. It came through her secondary business account, the one that handled acquisition inquiries and partnership proposals, the one her assistant Monica filtered with the aggressive efficiency of someone who had once described her job as keeping the wolves from eating your calendar. But Monica was on a flight back from London that morning, which meant the filter was off, which meant the email landed directly, subject line unvarnished and plain. Pacific Rim expansion, confidential proposal, Sterling Group. She set down the contract, put her coffee cup on the side table, read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat very still in the armchair for a long moment, looking out the window at the street below, where Maplewood Court was doing its ordinary Tuesday morning things. The woman from 2A walking her elderly beagle, the delivery truck double parked outside the bakery, a kid on a bike cutting through the parking lot too fast. And she thought about what she'd just read with the particular suspended quality of someone standing at the edge of something large, trying to gauge the drop. The proposal was from a consortium she'd been indirectly courting for 3 years. A Pacific Rim expansion deal, Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo, that would triple Sterling Group's operational footprint inside 18 months. It was the kind of offer that didn't come twice, the kind that people in her position spent careers positioning themselves for. Her CFO had called it a generational opportunity in a board memo last quarter, which was the kind of language CFOs used when they wanted you to understand that declining was not a category of response they had modeled. She would need to relocate. Not permanently, the email was careful to say. A primary base in Singapore for the first year, at minimum. Regular presence in Sydney and Tokyo. Her entire senior leadership would need to restructure around the new time zones. The consortium wanted an answer by the end of the month. She drank the rest of her coffee. It had gone cold. She did not think immediately about Nolan. She did not think immediately about Lily's painting of the horse on her wall, or the dragon book on her nightstand, or the way the three of them had settled into something over the past 2 months that she didn't have a clean word for, but that she felt the shape of every morning when she woke up and every night when she came home. She thought about it later. That came later. First, she called her CFO, Richard, who picked up on the first ring with the energy of someone who had already been awake for 2 hours thinking about exactly this. You saw it, he said. I saw it. Avery, I know what it is, Richard. The consortium has been building toward this for, I said I know. She was at the window now, phone pressed to her ear, watching the delivery truck finally pull away. Give me a week. They want an answer by month's end. I have 3.5 weeks. Give me one. A pause. Richard was a careful man. He had worked for her for 6 years and had learned that pushing her before she was ready produced worse outcomes than waiting, and that waiting, with Avery, was never very long. 1 week, he said. But Avery, I want to say something. Say it. This is what you've been building toward. This is the whole point of the last 8 years. If you're hesitating for any reason that isn't strategic, it's too early in the morning for you to be managing me, Richard. I'm not managing you, Thank you for picking up. She hung up. Not unkindly, just definitively. She stood at the window for another 5 minutes. Then she went and showered and put on clothes and went to work, because work was what she did, and she was very good at it, and sometimes being good at something was the only reliable solid ground available. She did not tell Nolan that day. She told herself it was because there was nothing to tell yet. She hadn't made a decision. There was no news. She was not the kind of person who created drama from hypotheticals, and she was certainly not going to walk next door and say I might be moving to Singapore before she had even decided whether she was moving to Singapore. She told herself that. She was mostly convinced. What she did instead was show up at 4B that evening, the same as any evening. Nolan was on a work call. Lily was finishing homework at the kitchen table, and Avery sat across from her and helped her with a math worksheet about fractions that Lily approached with the resigned hostility of someone being asked to do something fundamentally unjust. "Why do fractions matter?" Lily said. It was not a question. "Because one day you'll need to have a recipe," Avery said, "and if you can't do fractions, you'll put in the wrong amount of baking soda and the whole thing will explode." Lily looked at her. "Has that happened to you?" "The recipe explosion?" "Yes, once. It was a birthday cake. It was a low point." "What did you do?" "Ordered from a bakery and told everyone I made it." Lily stared at her for a beat, then broke into a grin that spread from one side of her face to the other. "That's so bad," she said, delighted. "Yes, which is why you need fractions." Avery pointed at the worksheet. "So you don't have to lie to people about birthday cakes." Lily picked up her pencil. "Fine," she said, with the air of someone making a significant concession. "But I still don't see why I can't just use a calculator." "You can use a calculator, but you need to understand what the calculator is telling you." "Why?" "Because otherwise you're just trusting a machine and you don't know if it's right." Lily thought about this very seriously while working through the first problem. "That's actually a good point," she said, reluctantly. Nolan came out of his room 15 minutes later, phone call done, running a hand through his hair in the way he did when a call had been complicated. He looked at the two of them at the kitchen table. His expression did the thing it had started doing, the slight, unguarded ease, like something releasing. "How are fractions going?" he asked. "Better," Lily said. "Avery almost blew up a cake." "That's a lot of information to arrive to." "It was a birthday cake," Avery said. "It was years ago. I've grown." He got himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, listening to Lily explain the cake incident with considerable dramatic embellishment. Avery watched him over Lily's head and thought about the email and said nothing. That night, lying in her own apartment with the contract still unread on her desk and the email still open on her laptop, she thought about what Richard had said. "This is what you've been building toward. This is the whole point." Was it? She had started Sterling Group at 23 in a studio apartment with a laptop and one client and the specific reckless certainty of someone who didn't yet know enough to be afraid. She had built it piece by piece over 7 years, the late nights, the bad partnerships, the 3 years she barely slept, the 2 relationships that ended because she was always somewhere else even when she was in the room. She had built it into something real and large and respected and hers. It was her. Or it had been. She'd been so long in the building of it that she wasn't entirely sure anymore where Sterling Group ended and Avery Sterling began. She looked at the horse painting on the wall. Lily had given it to her 2 weeks ago and she'd hung it immediately, slightly crooked, using a nail she found in the kitchen drawer rather than waiting to do it properly. It was the first thing she'd hung in this apartment, the first thing on any of these walls. She turned off the light, lay in the dark. Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo. The whole point of 8 years. She did not sleep well. The week that followed was, professionally, a very full one. Richard sent her a 30-page analysis of the expansion opportunity that she read on a Tuesday night in one sitting and annotated so thoroughly that it looked like a different document when she was done. Her board chair, Helen Park, 62. Impeccably precise, who had backed Avery since year 3 and had the institutional memory of someone who had seen every kind of founder mistake, called her on Wednesday morning. "Have you read Richard's memo?" Helen asked. "I wrote most of his memo," Avery said. "Then you know what I'm going to say. You're going to say it's the opportunity of a decade and I should take it. I'm going to say it's the opportunity of your career and that you should examine very carefully any reason you might be hesitating." Avery was quiet for a moment. "What if the reason is a good one?" Helen was also quiet. They had known each other long enough that silence between them was not uncomfortable and frequently more informative than speech. "Is it a person?" Helen asked. Not unkindly. "I didn't say that." "You did not say it either." "Helen, I'm not telling you what to do. I never tell you what to do. I advise you what to do, which is legally different." A beat. "But I will say, and this is not as your board chair, this is as someone who has known you for 9 years, that you have spent a very long time building something that lives at the office. Whatever is making you hesitate, make sure you're not running from it the same way you've run toward everything else." Avery held the phone for a moment after Helen hung up. Outside her window, Maplewood Court was quiet in the early morning. She could hear, distantly, the sound of a car on the wet street. Across the hall, there was the muffled sound of an alarm going off. Lily's, probably, the one that played a song from that animated movie about the ocean that Avery had now heard enough times through the shared wall that she knew all the words. She got up, made coffee, did not look at the email. She got through Thursday and most of Friday by staying in her apartment with the door closed and working at a pace that didn't leave room for thinking about anything that wasn't work. She was good at this. She had honed this particular skill for the better part of a decade. Volume as insulation, output as armor. On Friday afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she recognized as her friend Dana, who had set her up on the ill-fated date weeks ago and who had been in careful penance mode ever since. "Board dinner tonight, downtown. Some people you should meet, the Pacific Deal. Richard already RSVP'd you. Please come. Wear the gray dress." Avery stared at this message for a moment. Then she typed back, "Fine." She wore the gray dress. She went to the dinner. It was at a restaurant on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, the kind of place where the view did most of the work and the food was incidental. There were 12 people around the table, CFOs and partners, and 2 members of the consortium, both of whom were polished and direct, and genuinely impressive in the way that people who have built significant things tend to be impressive. She was on. She knew how to be on. She asked the right questions and made the right points and held her own in a conversation that was half boardroom and half performance, which she had also learned a long time ago was often the same thing. Midway through dinner, one of the consortium members, a man named Chen Wei, who ran the Singapore operation and had the steady, watchful quality of someone who didn't say anything he hadn't already thought through twice, leaned toward her slightly. "I want to be direct with you, Ms. Sterling," he said, low enough that it didn't carry. "We've looked at the field carefully. There are 3 firms we'd consider for this partnership. You're the only one we'd build it around. That's not flattery. That's the assessment." Avery met his eyes. "I appreciate the directness. The hesitation concerns me, not the fact of it. Good founders hesitate. The length of it." He picked up his water glass. "Whatever's pulling at you, I hope you find your answer soon. Opportunities of this scale don't hold." She drove home alone. The city slid past the windows, the lit-up buildings, the late Friday foot traffic on the sidewalks, the particular way the downtown lights reflected off rain-wet streets. And she sat in the back of the car and looked at it and thought about Chen Wei's words. Whatever is pulling at you. She knew what was pulling at her. She had known for a week. She just hadn't said it to herself with the plainness it deserved yet. What was pulling at her was a kitchen table with art supplies on it. A child who ate spring rolls with territorial conviction and fell asleep mid-sentence and asked direct questions without any of the social machinery that adults wrap around direct questions to make them more palatable. A man who handed her coffee and said, "I know," when she couldn't find the right words and didn't require her to be anything other than what she was in any given moment. What was pulling at her was the fact that she had spent 2 months going to sleep in an apartment that felt less empty than it had before, and she wasn't sure she knew how to go back to the other kind. She got home at 11. The building was quiet. The hallway outside 4B had a faint light under the door. Nolan's reading lamp, she'd learned. He stayed up late reading when Lily was asleep. She'd seen him mention it once, offhandedly, and she'd thought about it more than she'd mentioned. She stood in the hallway for a moment between 4B and 4C, her key in her hand. She went inside, did not knock. The weekend was the neighborhood festival. It happened every year in mid-October. The Maplewood Street Fair, 4 blocks of vendors and food trucks, and a bluegrass band that was technically competent and enthusiastically loud. Lily had been talking about it for 2 weeks, with the intensity of someone who had marked it on a physical calendar and crossed off days. Nolan had promised kettle corn and a fair amount of letting her look at things he had no intention of buying. It was Saturday. Cool enough for jackets, warm enough that the jackets came off by noon. The street was blocked off by 10 in the morning and already filling when the 3 of them came down from the building. Lily pulling ahead immediately because she had spotted the kettle corn cart from half a block away. Nolan calling after her to stay where he could see her, Avery falling into step beside him. She had told herself she was going to tell him that day. About the email, about Singapore. She had been telling herself this for 4 days. "You're quiet," he said, about 20 minutes in. They were standing near the edge of a craft booth while Lily examined handmade ceramic animals with grave deliberation. "I'm always quiet," Avery said. "You're differently quiet." He didn't push it. He said it the way he said most things, observationally, without requiring a response. She looked at the ceramic animals, a small blue rabbit, a fox with an orange glaze, a dog that looked more like a seal. "Nolan, yeah, I need to tell you something." She kept her eyes on the booth. "I've been sitting on it for a week because I wasn't sure what to do with it, and I still don't know what to do with it, but I'm tired of carrying it around without saying it." He turned to look at her. She could feel it. "There's an expansion deal," she said. "Pacific Rim, Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo. It's significant. My board wants me to take it. My CFO wants me to take it. It's the kind of thing you spend years building toward." She paused. "It would mean relocating. Singapore primarily for at least the first year." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. She counted them. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. His face was doing something careful, the thing it did when he was feeling something he hadn't decided how to feel yet. He looked like someone who had just been handed a piece of news and was in the very first moment of understanding its weight. "When would you need to decide?" he asked. "End of the month." He nodded. Looked at Lily, who had made her selection. The fox, apparently, after a deliberation that suggested the ceramic animals had significant individual personalities she needed to assess thoroughly. "That's a big opportunity," he said. His voice was level. Practiced level, she thought. The kind of level that took effort. "It is." "You should take it." She looked at him sharply. He met her eyes. "I mean it. You built something real, Avery. This is what it was for. You shouldn't—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "You shouldn't make a smaller version of your life just because—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Just because what?" she said quietly. He looked away. Back at Lily, who was now negotiating with the vendor, holding up the fox ceramic in one hand and the blue rabbit in the other with the expression of someone presenting evidence. "I'm not going to ask you to stay," he said. "That's not—" A breath. "We're neighbors, Avery. We're friends. I don't have the right to—" "That's not what I'm asking you," she said. "Then what are you asking me?" She didn't have an answer that was clean enough. She thought about what Helen had said. Make sure you're not running from it the same way you've run toward everything else. And she thought about Chen Wei's assessment and the 30-page memo and the gray dress and the restaurant on the 42nd floor. And then she looked at the fox ceramic that Lily was now carrying toward them with an expression of pure, uncomplicated triumph. And she thought about the horse painting on her wall and the dragon book on her nightstand, and the way her apartment felt different now than it had 2 months ago, in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm just telling you." He nodded. "Once? Small." Lily arrived, holding out the fox ceramic for approval. "His name is Edmund," she announced. "Edmund," Nolan said. "Strong choice." "He has a wise face." She looked between the two of them with the quick, perceptive attention she always brought to the moments when the adult world was doing something complicated. "Are you guys okay?" "We're fine," Avery said. Lily looked at her for a second, then at her father, then back at Edmund the fox, apparently deciding to accept the answer. "Can we get kettle corn now?" she asked. "Yes," Nolan said. "Let's get kettle corn." They walked. Avery put her hands in her jacket pockets. Beside her, Nolan was quiet. A different quality of quiet from his normal kind, edged, like something sitting just under the surface. She felt the weight of it the same way she felt her own. Not badly, just honestly. The festival moved around them. The bluegrass band started up somewhere on the next block. Fiddle and banjo, energetic and slightly discordant, the way live music always is when it's actually live. Lily got kettle corn and ate it with the focused joy of someone who has been anticipating exactly this. Avery bought a jar of honey from a booth run by a man who talked about his bees with the passion of someone who has found their specific purpose and is at peace with it. Around 2 in the afternoon, they found the block where the kids' activities were set up. Face painting, a ring toss, a booth with those little craft kits that produce something approximately resembling what was on the packaging if you squinted. Lily wanted her face painted. This was non-negotiable. Avery sat on a bench nearby while Lily sat in the face painter's chair, requesting something she described as a sunset but with a dragon in it, which the face painter received with only minor visible anxiety. Nolan sat beside Avery on the bench. They were close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. Neither of them moved away. "I'm not going to be weird about it," he said after a while. She looked at him. "The Singapore thing." He was watching Lily, not her. "I'm not going to make it into something it doesn't need to be. You've been honest with me, and I'm going to be honest with you, and then we're going to let it be what it is." "Okay," she said. "I would miss you," he said, simply. "Me and Lily both, that's honest." He paused. "But what I want doesn't have anything to do with what you should do. That's also honest." She sat with that. The band was playing something faster now, drifting over from the next block. Lily was being consulted about the exact shade of orange for the sunset. "Can I tell you something?" Avery said. "Yeah. I grew up moving a lot. My dad's job, we relocated every 2 or 3 years. New city, new school, new everything. I got very good at not getting attached to things because getting attached made the leaving harder." She was looking at her hands, the honey jar in her lap. "I built Sterling Group the same way, expandable, movable, not tied to any single place, always the next thing." She swallowed. "It's a very efficient way to build a company, and a very lonely way to build a life," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her now, directly. No managing of the gaze this time, no looking away first. "I've been doing a version of the same thing," he said. "Different mechanism, same result. Keep things small, keep things managed. Don't reach for anything you might lose." A beat. "Lily's the only reason I didn't disappear completely inside that." She held his gaze. "And now?" He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression, not resolution, not declaration, just honesty, the raw, unglamorous kind. "Now, I don't want to keep things small," he said. "I'm scared of that, but it's true." She looked away first this time. At the festival crowd moving around them, the ordinary Saturday of it, families, couples, old people with coffee cups, a pair of teenagers that bumped into a booth and knocked over a display and dissolved into laughter. All of it ordinary. All of it vivid in the particular way that things become vivid when you're paying the kind of attention that comes from knowing something might change. Lily came back with a face that featured an extremely ambitious sunset, a small dragon in one corner, and what appeared to be a star that had been added improvisationally. "The star wasn't in my design," she said, pointing to it, "but I think it improves it." "Objectively, yes," Avery said. Lily examined both of them with the face painter's creation drying on her cheeks, and the remnants of the kettle corn in the paper bag, and Edmund the fox tucked under her arm. The look was quick, assessing, the kind that saw more than it let on. She sat down between them on the bench, just fit herself into the space between them without ceremony, the way children occupy space when they feel safe, sprawling and certain. "Can we come back next year?" she asked. "To this festival?" "Sure," Nolan said. Lily looked at Avery. "You too," she said, as if this required separate confirmation. Avery looked at this child, this small, direct, enormous-eyed person who drew horses and fell asleep mid-sentence and had told a near stranger her mother's name with a careful tenderness that an adult twice her age might have flinched from. and felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't have predicted or prepared for. It wasn't large or dramatic. It was the opposite of large and dramatic. It was very quiet and very specific, and it felt like something settling into a place where there had been a vacancy for a long time. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." Lily nodded, satisfied. She leaned back against the bench between them, opened her paper bag for the remaining kettle corn, and offered it in both directions without looking to see if they took any. Nolan did. So did Avery. The band played. The festival moved around them. Edmund the fox watched the crowd from under Lily's arm with his wise ceramic face, and no one said anything important for a while, and the afternoon held all of them in it the way afternoons sometimes do. Lightly, temporarily, and with the specific generosity of a thing that doesn't know yet it's being remembered. That night, after Lily was in bed and the festival crowd had cleared from the streets below, and the building had gone to its late-night quiet, Avery sat in her armchair with her laptop and the Pacific Rim proposal open in front of her, and the honey jar on the side table and the horse painting on the wall, and she stayed there for a long time. She thought about Chen Wei's words. She thought about Richard's memo. She thought about every version of herself that had gotten her to this apartment, this city, this particular Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, when the email arrived and something shifted before she even understood what was shifting. She thought about what Nolan had said on the bench. "I don't want to keep things small." The plain scared honesty of it. She thought about Lily asking you too with the matter-of-fact directness of a child who did not see why the answer would be anything other than yes. She closed the laptop, sat in the dark with the horse on the wall and the sounds of the building around her. The pipes, the distant traffic, the particular silence of 4B across the hall where two people she had not expected were sleeping. She did not make a decision that night, but for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt like she might be getting close to one. She didn't sleep. Not really. She dozed somewhere around 2 in the morning, the laptop still warm on the side table, the room dark except for the city light coming through the gap in the curtains. But sleep in the real sense, the kind that actually rests you, that didn't come. She surfaced every hour or so with the specific exhaustion of someone whose brain has decided that nighttime is optimal for processing everything it couldn't get to during the day. By 5:30, she gave up entirely. Made coffee, stood at the window in the dark with the mug in both hands, and watched the street below go from empty to the first thin trickle of early morning. A jogger, a man walking a large dog that wanted to stop at every lamppost, the delivery van from the bakery making its 6 a.m. drop. The city looked the same as it always did. That was the thing about cities. They absorbed whatever you were carrying and kept going regardless, indifferent and oddly comforting in their indifference. She had a decision to make, and she knew what it was. She had probably known for longer than she'd admitted to herself. That was the honest accounting of it. The email had arrived and shaken something loose, and for 2 weeks she'd been telling herself she was deliberating when what she was actually doing was building up the nerve to acknowledge what she already knew. The question was not whether to take the deal. The question was whether she was making the right choice for the right reasons, or whether she was about to do the thing Helen had warned her about. Run from something by running towards something else, the way she always had, the way she was very practiced at, the way that had kept her whole and moving and productive and, for a very long time, alone. She needed to be sure. At 7:15, she heard Lily's alarm through the wall. The ocean song, as always, slightly muffled but fully recognizable. She heard the thump of small feet hitting the floor, then the shuffle of them toward the bathroom, then the distant sound of Nolan's voice saying something she couldn't make out, and Lily responding in the aggrieved tone of someone who resented mourning on principle. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. Just for a second. Then she picked up her coffee and went to sit at her desk. She called Helen at 8. Helen picked up on the third ring, which for Helen at 8 in the morning meant she'd been awake for hours. "You've decided," Helen said. Not a question. "I'm going to decline the Pacific deal," Avery said. The silence on the other end lasted 6 full seconds. Avery counted. "Tell me why," Helen said. Her voice was careful, not disappointed, not approving, just listening. "Because I've been asking myself all week whether I'm hesitating for the right reasons, and I kept not being able to answer it, and then last night I realized that I couldn't answer it because I was asking the wrong question." She had her notepad in front of her, the one she used when she needed to think out loud on paper. She'd filled 3 pages in the night. The right question isn't whether this is a good opportunity. It's an exceptional opportunity. The right question is what kind of company I want Sterling Group to be in 10 years, and whether chasing scale at this speed serves that or just serves the idea of scale. That's a strategic argument, Helen said. It's also true. Is it the only reason? Avery was quiet for a beat. No, she said, it's not the only reason, but it's a real one. I've been running a reactive growth model for 3 years. Opportunity presents itself, I expand to meet it. The Pacific deal is the logical extension of that, and I don't think the logical extension of that model is where I want to end up. She paused. I want to build something that doesn't require me to be somewhere else constantly. I want to consolidate what we have and build it properly instead of wider. The board will push back. I know. I'll handle the board. Another pause. Helen, Avery had always felt, had a particular quality that distinguished her from most of the people in her professional life. She listened to what was actually being said rather than what she expected to hear. Is this also about something personal? Helen asked. Yes, Avery said. She wasn't going to lie to Helen. She'd never been able to, and she didn't want to start now. But I want to be clear. The personal thing and the strategic thing are both real, and they both point the same direction. This isn't me sacrificing a business decision for a personal one. They happen to agree. How confident are you in that? 80%. That's honest. The other 20% is just fear, Avery said. I've learned to make decisions from the 80% and let the 20 figure itself out. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she made a sound that was almost a laugh. You know, I started my first company when I was 29, she said. I had a partner. It was complicated. I turned down a merger that year that would have made me very wealthy very quickly because it would have meant relocating. People thought I was making a personal decision and disguising it as a strategic one. Were you? Both, Helen said. The strategic argument was real. The other thing was also real. 20 years later, the company is still here, and so is she, which I consider 2 good outcomes. A pause. I'm not telling you that because I think the situations are equivalent. I'm telling you because I'm tired of the idea that personal reasons and good decisions are mutually exclusive. Avery let that settle. Thank you, Helen, she said. Don't thank me. Just make sure the board memo is airtight. Richard is going to be difficult. Richard is always difficult. Richard is about to be spectacular, Helen said, which turned out to be accurate. She called Richard next. It was, as Helen predicted, not a short or comfortable conversation. Richard was professional about it, which meant he was precise and controlled in his disagreement rather than emotional, which in some ways made it harder because there was nothing to push against. He made his case clearly and well. The numbers were real. The opportunity cost was real. Avery acknowledged all of it. I understand the analysis, Richard, she said. I've read it 4 times. My decision isn't based on disagreeing with your numbers. Then what is it based on? A different set of priorities. A pause. The board will want more than that. The board will get more than that. I have a counter-proposal. A Pacific partnership model that doesn't require relocation. Smaller initial footprint, shared infrastructure with local operators. Slower growth, but lower exposure, and a structure I can actually run from here. Silence on the other end. She could hear Richard recalibrating. He was good at recalibrating when given something to work with. That would require renegotiating with the consortium, he said slowly. I know. Chenwei is direct and he's smart. He'll either accept a modified structure or he won't. And if he doesn't, we'll revisit in 12 months when our domestic numbers are stronger and I have more leverage. She kept her voice even. I'm not walking away from the Pacific market, Richard. I'm changing the terms of engagement. Another pause. Longer. Send me what you're thinking, he said finally. I'll look at it. Thank you. Avery? He paused. I hope whatever this is, it's worth it. She thought about the bench at the festival, about Lily pressing herself into the space between 2 adults without any ceremony and offering kettle corn in both directions. About Nolan's voice saying, "I don't want to keep things small," with the plain, scared honesty of someone who meant it. "I think it might be," she said. She spent the rest of the morning drafting the counterproposal, which took 4 hours and 3 complete rewrites, and one very long walk around the block in which she talked to herself quietly and got a mildly concerned look from an elderly woman walking past. By noon, she had something she was willing to show Richard. By 1, she had sent it. By 2, she had his first response, which was terse but engaged, which from Richard was the equivalent of enthusiasm. She ate lunch standing at her kitchen counter. Leftover Thai from 2 weeks ago that she'd frozen, reheated unevenly, consumed without tasting. Then she sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at her phone for a moment. She didn't have the right words. She knew enough about herself now to know that she tended to over-prepare for important conversations, arriving with organized arguments and structured points, and that this habit had served her very well in conference rooms and very badly in the places where precision mattered less than honesty. She picked up her phone. Typed, "Are you home tonight?" The response came back in 4 minutes. "After 6. Lily has art class until 5:30. Everything okay?" She typed, "Yes. I have something to tell you. Come find me when you're back." A pause. Then, "Okay." She put the phone down. She did not do anything productive for the rest of the afternoon, which was unusual enough that she noticed it and chose not to fight it. She read for a while. The novel from the nightstand, the one she'd been at for 3 weeks because she kept reading the same page twice. She made tea and didn't drink it. She looked at the horse painting and thought about Lily's deliberate brushstrokes and the way she had said, "I've been working on the legs because legs are hard." Legs are hard. Most of the structural work is hard, she thought. The visible parts were what people saw. The underneath was what held it up. At 6:15, she heard them in the hall. Lily's voice first, animated, mid-story. And then Nolan's lower one, and then the sound of their door. She gave it 15 minutes. Enough time for backpacks to be dropped and shoes to be kicked off, and the first critical after-school snack to be located. Then she crossed the hall and knocked. Nolan opened the door. He was in his work clothes still. Dark jeans, a button-down he'd loosened at the collar. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she'd gotten to know well enough to read. Present, careful, genuinely trying to see rather than just look. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She glanced past him. "Is Lily?" "Living room. She's telling Gerald about her art class. It may be a while." "Can we?" She gestured toward the kitchen. The narrow, cluttered, permission-slip-covered kitchen that she had spent more time in over the past 2 months than she'd spent in her own. "Yeah," he said. "Come in." He made coffee without asking, because he knew by now that she almost always wanted coffee, and that offering felt more performative than just making it. She sat at the kitchen table. Lily's chair was occupied by a backpack and a permission slip, and Edmund the fox, who had taken up semi-permanent residence at the table and watched proceedings with his wise ceramic expression, and Nolan set a mug in front of her and sat down across from her. From the living room came the murmur of Lily's voice, patient and thorough, apparently giving Gerald a detailed summary of everything that had happened at art class. "I called Helen this morning," Avery said. "And Richard." Nolan's thoughts were around his own mug. He was very still. "I'm not taking the Pacific deal," she said. He looked at her. Something moved through his face, quick, complex, not quite what she'd expected. Not relief exactly. More like someone who had been braced for an impact that didn't arrive and was now recalibrating to the different reality. "Avery," he started. "Let me finish," she said, "because I need you to understand that this isn't... I need you to know that I made this decision for myself. Not for you, not for... I made it because when I sat down and actually looked at it clearly, it wasn't what I wanted. The expansion, the relocation, the structure of it. It was what I'd been building toward because it was the next logical step, not because it was actually the thing I wanted to be doing." She held his gaze. "I have a counter-proposal. A modified partnership model that doesn't require me to leave. It's a real strategic argument, not a rationalization. I've already drafted it and sent it to Richard." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that true?" he said. Not accusatory, just needing to know. "It's 80% true," she said, because she owed him the same honesty she'd given Helen. The other 20% is that She stopped, looked at her coffee. The other 20% is that I looked at what I had here and I didn't want to leave it. I'm not going to pretend that's not part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And I need you to know it's not the whole thing, because I've spent a long time making myself smaller in different ways for different people, and this isn't that. He was looking at her with an attention that felt physical, like something with weight. I believe you, he said. Nolan, I believe you. He set his mug down. I'm not saying it because you need reassurance. I'm saying it because I've been listening to you for 2 months, and I know the difference between when you're performing something and when you're just telling me what's true, and right now you're just telling me what's true. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her chest did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency in his vicinity, the loosening, like a structure she'd been maintaining with considerable effort that was quietly, incrementally choosing to relax. I was scared, she said, that I was running toward something again instead of actually choosing it. Are you still scared? Yes. She let out a breath, but scared of the real thing this time, not scared of a version of it I made up so I didn't have to look directly at it. He was quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the late afternoon light was doing the October thing where it went golden very fast and then began to fade, and the kitchen felt warmer for it in the way small spaces do when the light changes. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't relieved, he said carefully. When you said you weren't taking it, I felt... He stopped. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel that, but I want you to know that what I said at the festival, I meant it, about not making it into something it doesn't need to be. What I wanted was for you to make the choice that was actually right for you, and if that had been Singapore, he pressed his lips together, I would have figured out how to be okay with that. Would you have? A beat. I was working on the speech all week. I was going to be very gracious about it. Something in her face gave way. Not quite a laugh, closer to the release of something that had been held a long time. I bet you were, she said. It was a good speech. I'm sorry I didn't give you the chance to use it. He shook his head. I really, genuinely am not. They sat for a moment in the kitchen with the coffee and the October light, and Edmund the fox presiding over the table with his glaze-sealed dignity. And from the living room, Lily's voice had shifted from summary to apparent interrogation of Gerald's opinions on color theory. Then Nolan said, quietly, and without any of the managed carefulness, I don't know how to do this properly. She looked at him. I haven't... since Claire. He stopped. Started again. I've been going around the outside of it for 2 months telling myself it was fine. It was just friendship. It was just being neighbors, and I think we both know that's been a technicality for a while. He looked at his hands. I'm not good at the beginning part anymore. I've forgotten how it goes, and I don't have a script, and I'm probably going to get things wrong. I'm not good at this either, she said. I have a terrible track record. I have been told in multiple ways by multiple people that I am not easy to... Don't, he said. She stopped. Don't repeat what they said. His voice was even, but firm. You've done that before. Brought in what other people decided about you and used it as evidence. It's not evidence. It's just what people who weren't right for you said. He held her gaze. I'm not making you a promise. I don't think either of us needs a promise right now. I'm just saying, don't come in here already carrying their verdict. She was very still for a moment. Okay, she said. The word felt different in her mouth than it usually did. Less like a concession and more like a door. From the living room came a dramatic pause in Lily's monologue, followed by, Dad, can Avery stay for dinner? They both looked at the kitchen doorway and then at each other. What are we making? Avery called back. A brief silence while Lily consulted what were apparently her own internal records. Pasta with olives, she said. Dad said this morning he was thinking about it. Nolan looked at Avery. I did say that. Extra olives? More than is strictly reasonable, yes. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. Then yes, she said, loudly enough to carry to the living room. I'm staying. The sound from the next room was immediate and uncomplicated, the pure, unstudied satisfaction of an 8-year-old who has gotten exactly the outcome she hoped for. Dinner that night was loud in the specific way that kitchen dinners are loud when someone has things to say and is going to say them, regardless of whether they represent a natural transition in conversation. Lily had an opinion about whether the dragon in her chapter book was actually a dragon or something else entirely. She had been reading ahead, and there were hints, she said, that required investigation. And she delivered this theory with the intensity of someone presenting doctoral research while simultaneously eating more olives than she had technically been served. "You're eating my olives," Nolan told her. "I didn't take yours." "That was from the center of the bowl." "The center of the bowl belongs to everyone." She looked at Avery. "Right?" "I'm not getting involved in the olive allocation dispute," Avery said. "That's between the two of you." Lily pointed her fork at her father. "Avery's neutral. That means I win." "That's not how neutral works." "I think it might be," Avery said, and then looked at her own plate with the expression of someone who had not intended to contribute to the dispute but had been drawn in anyway. Nolan looked at the two of them and made a sound that was not quite defeat but was adjacent to it. He got up and got more olives. After dinner, Lily was given 30 minutes of the ocean movie before bed, which she accepted with the pragmatism of someone who understood the terms of the deal. She took her blanket and Gerald and the dragon book and arranged herself on the couch with the focused comfort of someone nesting for the winter. Nolan and Avery cleaned up the kitchen, side by side at the sink, him washing, her drying, which had evolved into their natural positions over the past weeks without either of them formally assigning them. The kitchen was small enough that they were close, their shoulders occasionally touching when one of them reached for something, and neither of them made anything of it, which was itself a kind of making something of it. "Can I ask you something?" Avery said. "Yeah." "That first night, when I knocked on your door?" She handed him back a pot, which he put in the cabinet. "You didn't know me. You'd seen me maybe twice in the hallway. Why did you let me in?" He thought about it for a moment. Actually thought, rather than producing the first easy answer. "You looked like someone who needed a soft landing," he said. "And I had one to offer." He handed her a bowl. It wasn't more complicated than that. Most people would have said it wasn't their problem. Maybe. He was quiet for a second. Lily's mom used to say that every time you help someone who needs it, you're paying something forward on behalf of everyone who ever helped you. You don't know who they are. You just know the debt exists. He paused. "I'm not sure I fully believed it when she said it, but I've thought about it a lot since." Avery dried the bowl, set it on the counter. "She sounds like she was a good person." She was. She was also impatient, and she couldn't parallel park to save her life, and she argued about every restaurant choice we ever made, and she was a good person. He handed her the last glass. "People tend to make the dead simple after a while. I try not to let myself do that. It doesn't honor who they actually were." Avery looked at him. "How long did it take to be able to say that? The real version of her?" He thought. "Long time. Too long, maybe." He let the water out of the sink. "Grief makes you want to only remember the best parts. Like if you focus hard enough on the best parts, you're preserving something, but what you're actually doing is losing the person while keeping the monument." He dried his hands. "The real version of her. The whole thing. The parking and the arguments and all of it. That's actually her. The monument is just me." Avery was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing something like that in reverse," she said, "with the people who hurt me. Only remembering the worst version of them, like it was the most accurate one." He looked at her. "It's also easier," she said. "If they were entirely wrong, then you don't have to look at what you contributed, what you chose, why you stayed." She folded the dish towel. "The real version is more complicated, and it means I have more to account for." "That's a hard thing to say out loud," he said. "I've been working up to it." He took the dish towel from her hands and hung it on the handle of the oven, and when he turned back she was very close, closer than the kitchen strictly required, and neither of them had moved to make it happen, and neither of them moved back. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "I don't have a script for this." "I know." She looked up at him. He had 3 inches on her, more in her regular shoes, about even now in her socked feet. "I don't need a script. I just need it to be real." "It's real," he said. "That I can promise." He reached up and pushed a piece of her hair back from her face. Just that, just a single small gesture, which landed with considerably more weight than its size. And she let him, and for a moment they just stood in the small kitchen with the pasta pot drying on the counter and the sound of the ocean movie drifting in from the living room. Two people who had spent a long time being careful, standing close enough that careful was no longer entirely possible. He kissed her. It was not a spectacular kiss. It was brief and slightly tentative and tasted like coffee, and it was exactly the right thing for what it was. Not a conclusion, not a declaration, just a door opening. She put her hand against his chest, felt his heartbeat, which was not entirely steady, which made her feel something she hadn't expected. Relief. That he was as unsteady as she was. That this was not more composed for him than it was for her. They stood there for a moment after. "Dad!" Lily's voice from the living room, very calm. "The movie's over." They stepped back. Avery pressed her mouth flat. Nolan closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. "Coming," he called. He looked at Avery. She looked back at him. Something moved between them that was partly laughter and partly the specific tenderness of being interrupted at exactly the right time by something that reminded you what actually mattered most. He went to get Lily sorted for bed. Avery stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, looking at the dish towel on the oven handle and the pasta pot, and Edmund the fox, who had migrated from the table to the counter at some point and was observing her with his usual imperturbable expression. "Don't look at me like that," she said to the ceramic fox. Edmund said nothing, which was extremely diplomatic of him. When Nolan came back, Lily was in bed, Gerald was in position, the dragon book was on the nightstand. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Avery, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there wasn't a version of what needed to be said that fit neatly into words right now. "You should probably go home," he said eventually. "You have the counter-proposal to finish." "I sent it to Richard at noon." "Then you should go home because it's a Tuesday night, and I have an early call and neither of us is 24 years old. She laughed. Actually, laughed. The real kind, the unplanned kind. That's the least romantic reason to end an evening I've ever heard. "I'm not trying to be romantic. I'm trying to be realistic." He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her. "I'm not trying to rush this. I want to do it right. Which means I'm not going to ask you to stay tonight just because today was a significant day and we're both feeling significant things." She looked at him for a moment. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about it a lot," he admitted. "I have a lot of quiet time at 2 a.m. She reached up and put her hand on his jaw. "Just briefly, just a moment." "Okay," she said. "I'll go home." "Thank you." "You're extremely sensible for someone who just kissed a woman in their kitchen." "One of us has to be." She picked up her shoes from beside the door. He walked her the 6 feet to the hallway and held the door open. She stood on the threshold and looked at him in the hallway light and thought about the first time she'd stood in this exact spot, wet and broken-heeled and barely holding herself together, and about how far this moment was from that one and how close it still felt. The way the beginning of a thing always remains present inside whatever the thing becomes. "Nolan," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad I knocked on your door." He looked at her with the expression she'd spent 2 months learning. The real one. The one that didn't manage itself. "Me too," he said. She went back to 4C. She sat in her armchair with the laptop and the counter-proposal on the screen and the honey jar and the horse painting and all of it. Her hands were slightly unsteady. She noticed this and found that she didn't mind. She thought about what he'd said about Claire, the real version, not the monument, the parking, and the arguments, and all of it. She thought about her own past. The people, the mistakes, the architecture she'd built around herself to prevent certain kinds of hurt, and the ways that architecture had also prevented certain kinds of life. She was 30 years old. She had built something real, and it was hers. She was sitting in a rental apartment in a city she'd arrived in for a project and had stayed in for reasons she hadn't predicted. And next door were 2 people who had changed the shape of her life without any of them formally deciding to do it. She opened a new document. Started to write the notes for the board memo. Got 3 paragraphs in. Stopped. Looked at the horse painting. Lily had gotten the legs right. She'd practiced until the structure was correct, and then she'd painted it large and confident and given it away without hesitation, because that was the kind of person Lily was. She worked at the hard parts and then trusted the result. Avery thought that was probably a good way to do most things. She went back to the memo, wrote until midnight. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed and slept, for the first time in over a week, without waking up every hour to conduct anxious negotiations with her own brain. The street was quiet outside. The building settled. Across the hall in 4B, a man who had spent 5 years keeping the lights on was probably also sleeping, or trying to, in the way of someone who is unused to being hopeful and is slowly learning to be again. Neither of them had made any promises. Neither of them had produced a clean resolution or drawn a clear line between what this was and what it would become. It was still uncertain, still tentative, still populated by two people with significant amounts of damage and the attendant caution that damage produces. But it was real. It was present. And it was theirs, in whatever complicated, unfinished way that meant. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. The counterproposal took 11 days to negotiate. Not 11 easy days, took in. 11 days of early morning calls with Richard, late-night revisions to the partnership structure, 2 video calls with Chen Wei that ran long enough that Avery had to reschedule other meetings and eat lunch standing over her keyboard. Chen Wei was, as she'd predicted, direct. He pushed back on the modified footprint, questioned the local operator model, asked 3 times in 3 different ways whether Sterling Group was serious about the Pacific market, or whether this was a retreat dressed in strategic language. "It's not a retreat," Avery told him on the second call at 11 p.m. her time. "It's a different entry point. We build the infrastructure correctly from the start rather than fast. You get a stronger partner in 18 months than you would have gotten in 6. "The timeline concerns the consortium," Chen Wei said. "The timeline is realistic. What you were offering me was fast. Fast and realistic are not the same thing, and you know that better than most." A pause on his end. She had learned that Chen Wei's pauses were not hesitation. They were processing. He was deciding whether what she'd said was true or whether she was selling him something. "Send me the revised projections," he said. "I'll take it back to the group." She sent the projections. She waited. She did not pace. She'd trained herself out of pacing years ago because it was unproductive, and she'd put a small crack in her office floor in her second year of business from doing it. But she did drink more coffee than was medically advisable, and she did rearrange the books on her shelf twice, which was the more sophisticated version of the same nervous energy. On the 11th day, Chen Wei called. "The consortium will accept the modified structure," he said, "with 2 amendments. The amendments were manageable. She accepted them on the spot. Not because she was eager, but because she'd already modeled them into her best-case scenario, and they landed inside it. When she hung up, she sat at her desk for a moment in the quiet apartment and let the reality of it settle. The deal was done. A real Pacific partnership, built on terms she'd designed, with a structure she could actually run without dismantling the rest of her life to do it. Sterling Group would grow. She would stay. She felt the satisfaction of it. Genuine, specific, not inflated. Good work, done well, on her terms. Then she got up, crossed the hall, and knocked on 4B. Nolan opened the door in a t-shirt and what were clearly the sweatpants of a man who had just finished a long day and had committed to the evening. He looked at her face and read it immediately. 2 months of attention had made him good at this. "It worked?" he said. "It worked." He smiled, not the managed kind, the actual kind. The one that reached his eyes and made him look younger and less careful. He stepped back and she came in and he put his arms around her, not dramatically, just held her, her face against his shoulder, his chin on the top of her head, and it was not a grand gesture and it did not need to be. "Congratulations," he said into her hair. "Thank you for not telling me it would be fine," she said. "It might not have been." "Exactly." They stood like that for a moment. From Lily's room came the sound of the ocean movie again. She had apparently decided it was a nightly requirement at this stage of her life. And the familiar sound of it felt less like a disruption and more like the texture of where they were, the ordinary soundtrack of a Tuesday night in apartment 4B, which had become, without any formal declaration, one of Avery's favorite places. She didn't move in. That was not what happened next, and it was important that it wasn't, because neither of them were the kind of people for whom fast meant right, and they had both learned that particular lesson at some cost. What happened instead was slower and less cinematic, and for those reasons, more real. It happened in increments, in the particular way that lives actually change, not in moments of revelation, but in the accumulation of small decisions that eventually add up to something you couldn't have drawn a map to from the beginning. November arrived, which meant Lily's school had a parent-teacher conference that Nolan attended alone, the way he always had, and came home from looking the specific tired that comes from an evening of performing competence when you're already running at capacity. Avery had made soup, actual soup, from scratch, because she'd found a recipe and decided to attempt it, and had called her friend Dana twice during the process for guidance, and had produced something that was, by her own assessment, a solid 7 out of 10, and she had it on the stove when he got back. He stood in her kitchen doorway and looked at the pot on the stove and at her in the kitchen and said nothing for a moment. "How did it go?" she asked. "She's doing well," he said. "Miss Patterson says she's reading above grade level and her math has improved considerably since September." He paused. "She told Miss Patterson that fractions make more sense since she learned that not understanding them could cause cake explosions." Avery looked at the soup. "I take full credit for that." Miss Patterson seemed charmed. He came in and sat at her kitchen table, which was less cluttered than his but had acquired its own accumulation of Avery's particularities. The annotated contracts, the legal pads, the half-finished cup of tea she always forgot about. She asked if Lily had a consistent support structure at home. Avery was quiet, stirring the soup. "I said yes," Nolan said, "and I didn't feel like I was lying." She didn't look at him, but she felt the weight of what he'd said, and she let herself feel it rather than managing it into something more contained. "Good," she said. "Yeah." He picked up one of her legal pads and turned it over without reading it. "There was a moment she was showing me Lily's portfolio, the artwork from the semester, and there was the horse painting, a photo of it, because Lily had given the original away. Miss Patterson asked who she gave it to." He set the legal pad down. "Lily told her she gave it to a friend who needed something beautiful on her wall." Avery stopped stirring. "She's 8, Nolan said. "She's ancient," Avery said quietly. "She's the oldest person I know." He almost laughed. It came out as a breath and a shake of his head. "Yeah," he said, "she really is." The soup was good enough, not perfect, slightly oversalted, and Avery had underestimated the garlic, which she mentioned critically, and he disagreed with because he thought the garlic level was appropriate, which led to a 10-minute conversation about garlic philosophy that ended in a draw. They ate at her kitchen table with her legal pads pushed to one end and the contract stacked on the chair beside them, and it felt less like a dinner and more like an extension of a conversation they'd been having for months that didn't have a clear start or end point, just an ongoing quality, like weather. December came in cold. Lily decided that the building needed to be decorated for the holidays and undertook this project with the organizational conviction of someone running a small government. She drafted a list. She delegated. Nolan was assigned the door wreath, which he bought from a stand outside the grocery store after Lily rejected his first 3 choices as too boring. Avery was assigned the hallway, which she interpreted broadly and which resulted in string lights along the ceiling of the 4th-floor corridor that the building manager had technically not approved but also had not expressly prohibited. "Is this legal?" Nolan asked, watching her stand on a step stool to string the last section. "Define legal." "Permitted by the building." "There's no rule against lights." "There might be a rule against drilling into the ceiling." "I used adhesive clips." She stepped down from the stool and looked at the hallway. The lights were warm and slightly uneven because she'd run out of the good adhesive clips in the last section and improvised. It looked like a hallway that someone had decorated rather than one that had been professionally done, which was, she felt, the correct outcome. Better? He looked at it, at the warm, imperfect lights in the corridor they both lived in. "Yeah," he said. "Better." Lily came out to evaluate. She stood in the hallway in her socks with Gerald under one arm and looked the full length of it, head tilting slightly to one side the way she did when she was assessing something seriously. "It's a little crooked in the middle," she said. "Noted," Avery said, but I like it." She looked at Avery. "It looks like us." Avery and Nolan both looked at her. Warm but a little uneven, Lily clarified, and then went back inside as if this required no further elaboration. They stood in the hallway for a moment. The lights buzzed faintly. One of them was fractionally dimmer than the others. "She's not wrong," Nolan said. "She never is," Avery said. Marcus came to dinner in mid-December. This happened because Nolan had been doing a better job of letting people into the apartment, and because Marcus had been asking with increasing frequency and decreasing subtlety to meet the neighbor, and because Lily had independently decided she wanted to meet the man who had given a history essay an A- for croissant commitment, which Nolan had apparently told her about, which he regretted only mildly. Marcus arrived with wine and the energy of someone who had been looking forward to something and was trying not to show it too obviously, which meant he was showing it completely. He shook Avery's hand and then looked at Nolan with an expression that said approximately 40 things without words. Nolan looked at the ceiling. Dinner was loud. Marcus was a natural at a table. He asked Lily questions and listened to the answers with the patience of a man who genuinely liked children, which was either innate or a professional byproduct of years in a classroom. He told the croissant essay story at Lily's request, embellished only slightly from the original. He and Avery discovered a shared opinion about a particular documentary that had come out earlier in the year, which led to a 20-minute conversation about documentary filmmaking that Lily found moderately boring and Nolan found quietly fascinating to watch. Avery in genuine conversation with someone she'd just met, the specific animation of her when something interested her, the way she leaned forward slightly when she was making a point. After dinner, Lily excused herself to her room on the grounds that she had a Dragon Book chapter to finish, which was her standard exit strategy, and everyone present understood it as such. Marcus and Avery were talking about the documentary still. Nolan cleaned up the kitchen, which took longer than usual because he kept stopping to listen to the conversation in the next room, the easy back and forth of it, Avery's laugh, Marcus's response. Marcus found him in the kitchen on the pretense of getting water. "She's remarkable," Marcus said low. "I know," Nolan said. "You look different." He studied him for a moment with the frankness of a 15-year friendship. "You look like yourself again, the earlier version." Nolan was quiet. He ran the water, handed Marcus a glass. "Don't make it too significant," he said. "We're still figuring it out." "I'm not making it significant." Marcus leaned against the counter. "I'm just telling you that you look like someone who remembered something he thought he'd lost." A beat. "Claire would have liked her, by the way." Avery. "I think she would have liked her a lot." Nolan didn't answer. He looked at the window above the sink, at the dark street outside and the Christmas lights on the building across the way. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think so too." Marcus nodded once, didn't press, and took his water back to the living room. Nolan stood at the sink a moment longer and felt something he was still learning to feel without flinching. The possibility that loving someone now did not require the diminishment of what came before. That there was not a fixed supply of it. That the heart was not a container you eventually emptied, but something that, if you let it, just kept finding more room. He wasn't all the way there. He'd be honest about that. Some mornings he still woke up, and the first thing he thought of was Claire. Not always painfully, not always with the old flinching grief, but with a quieter kind of presence, like someone standing just outside the frame of a photograph. Some days that was fine. Some days it still cost him something to carry. The difference was that now he could feel it and keep going, not past it, through it, alongside it, with it as part of the whole thing rather than a wall between him and anything else. That was what 5 years of keeping the lights on had been building toward, without his knowing it. Christmas arrived, and with it the question of arrangements, where Lily would spend the holiday, which involved Nolan's sister in Portland, who came down for 3 days and made her assessment of Avery with the direct efficiency of a woman who had been watching out for her brother for 5 years and was not going to pretend otherwise. Her name was Petra, and she was 37 and slightly terrifying in the way of people who love fiercely and do not bother to disguise it. She and Avery spent 45 minutes in the kitchen at one point, while Nolan was down the hall helping Lily with a craft project, and he came back to find them both at the table with coffee and an open laptop, Petra apparently walking Avery through a spreadsheet of something that Nolan didn't ask about, and that both of them closed when he came in with the unified nonchalance of people who had definitely been talking about him. "What were you doing?" he asked. "Recipes," Petra said. "Spreadsheet of recipes?" he said. "I'm very organized," Petra said. Avery looked at her coffee. Later, when Petra was putting Lily to bed at Lily's loud invitation, Nolan sat on the couch and looked at Avery across the room. "She interrogated you," he said. "She was thorough," Avery agreed. "Are you okay?" "I liked her." She said it without qualification. "She loves you, and she loves Lily, and she wanted to know who I was. That's fair." She paused. "She asked me if I was going to stay." He was quiet. "I said yes," Avery said. "What did she say?" "She said good." And then she showed me the spreadsheet, which was actually about the holiday meal plan and not about you at all. "So she accepted your answer." "She accepted my answer." Avery tilted her head slightly. "She also said that you hadn't smiled this much in 3 years, and that if I messed that up, she would find out about it regardless of where I was." That's Petra. I appreciated it, actually. She looked at him across the room with the directness that was just her way of seeing things. Straight at them, no sideways. "It's good that you have someone who watches out for you like that." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Petra left the day after Christmas. She hugged Nolan at the door and told him nothing, just held on for a moment, which was Petra's version of saying everything she needed to say. She hugged Lily at length and with considerable drama because Lily required it, and then she turned to Avery and hugged her too, briefly, firmly, and in a way that was not performative but also was not small. "Don't be a stranger," Petra said. "I won't," Avery said, and meant it. January brought rain and the second draft of the Pacific Partnership Agreement, which Avery annotated over 4 days with a thoroughness that caused Richard to call her and ask if she was trying to personally rewrite international business law, to which she said, not entirely, and he chose to accept that. The deal signed on a Wednesday afternoon, quietly, without ceremony. Just Avery at her desk in 4C with a pen and a stack of documents, and then it was done, and Sterling Group had a Pacific presence built on terms that were real and sustainable and hers. She marked the occasion by going across the hall and making Nolan's coffee because he was on a call and she knew exactly how he took it, which still struck her sometimes as the kind of knowledge that accumulates so quietly you don't notice it until it's simply there. He mouthed thank you from across the desk. She left the coffee and went back to her apartment and sat down and thought, without drama or elaboration, that this particular ordinary Wednesday was one of the better days of her life. February arrived. Valentine's Day was a Tuesday, which Lily treated as an occasion requiring significant craft activity, and which produced a card for Avery that said, "You are my best neighbor," in large, careful letters, with a drawing of the Fox ceramic Edmund in the corner, which Avery kept on her desk in the way that she kept very few things that weren't work-related. Nolan took her to dinner. Not on Valentine's Day itself, because Valentine's Day was the day Lily's class had their party, and Nolan had promised to help. So he spent the afternoon cutting heart shapes out of red construction paper while Avery sat at his kitchen table with her laptop and worked, and occasionally held up a heart shape for quality assessment, and the evening was pizza and a movie that Lily fell asleep 20 minutes into, and it was quietly, exactly right. They went to dinner on the Thursday after, a place on Haverford that was good without trying to be impressive, which was the kind of place both of them preferred for reasons that probably said something accurate about them. They sat across from each other at a small table and talked about things that weren't work or logistics, or Lily's latest developments in the Dragon story, which had now reached chapter 12 and showed no signs of resolution. "Can I ask you something?" Nolan said around the middle of the meal. "Yes." "Are you happy?" He said it plainly, not performing the question, not building to it. "Not generally, right now, with this." She considered it. She gave it the consideration it deserved rather than the reflexive yes that came automatically. "Yes," she said, not the kind of happy that means nothing is hard. Some things are hard. The Pacific negotiation was hard. The board meeting last month was hard. Lily had that week in January where something was wrong at school and she wouldn't talk about it, and watching you navigate that was hard to watch. She held his gaze. "But underneath all of that, yes, in the way that matters. I'm happy." He nodded. looked at his plate for a moment. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while and I wanted to say it properly rather than just—" He stopped, looked up. "You changed things. Not in the big ways, or not just in the big ways. In the way the apartment feels when I come home. In the way Lily talks about the future now like it's something she's looking forward to instead of something she's careful about." He paused. "She used to hold things gently, like she was afraid they'd leave. She doesn't do that as much anymore." Avery sat very still. "You did that," he said. "You and me, maybe. But mostly you." "She did it herself," Avery said. "I just showed up consistently." "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." The restaurant was quiet around them. Soft light, other tables with their own conversations. The ordinary Friday hum of a place where people came to be somewhere good. "I love you," he said. He said it the same way he said most things. Without decoration, without strategy. Just the true thing, delivered as the true thing. She was quiet for a moment, not from hesitation. She knew what she felt. She had known for a while, had been carrying it with the cautious care of someone who had been burned enough times to be careful with fire, but had known. She was quiet because she wanted to be sure she said it in a way that was honest rather than reactive, that came from the real place rather than the place that simply wanted to match what she'd just been given. "I love you," she said. "I've been scared to say it because I've said it before and it turned out to be less true than I thought, and I needed to be sure this was the real version." She looked at him steadily. "It is. That's what I know." He let out a breath. Something in him that had been held released, and she watched it happen on his face, the easing of something long maintained. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They ate the rest of dinner, talked about other things. A book he was reading, the new bakery on Clement that had faster service than the old one, but worse scones, whether Lily's dragon story would have a sequel. The conversation moved and wandered and came back, the way it always did, like a current that knew its direction. Walking home, she put her hand in his. He held it the way he held most things, without making it a thing, which was its own kind of making it a thing. The February air was cold enough that their breath showed. The street was quiet. "What do you think she's doing right now?" Avery asked. "Lily?" He thought about it. "Reading ahead in the dragon book and then pretending she didn't when I get home. Gerald is probably also involved." "She told me yesterday that the dragon's name is Avery," she said. He stopped walking. She glanced at him. Chapter 11. The dragon's name is revealed, and it's Avery. She told me very seriously that it was a coincidence. He started walking again, but his hand tightened slightly around hers. "It's not a coincidence," he said. "Obviously not. She's 8. "Ancient," Avery said. He shook his head. The smile was there, the real one. The one that had taken her weeks to see the first time, and that she now saw regularly enough that she had stopped bracing for it and simply let it land. They got home. The hallway lights were still up. Avery had taken them down in January and then put them back up because the hallway looked wrong without them. They were still slightly crooked in the middle, where the adhesive had given slightly. Neither of them had fixed it. He unlocked 4B. She stood at her door. "Come in," he said. "She'll want to know how dinner was." "She's asleep." "She's not asleep." He was right. Lily was not asleep. She was in the living room under her blanket with Gerald and the dragon book, and an expression of someone who had been reading for several hours and was prepared to claim she had merely just woken up. "How was dinner?" she asked. "Good," Nolan said. "What did you have?" "Fish, pasta, good bread." Lily absorbed this. "Did you talk about anything interesting?" "Some things," he said. He sat on the couch beside her. She immediately leaned into him with the unceremonious ease of long habit, her head against his arm. He looked at Avery, who was standing in the living room in her coat, watching the two of them with an expression that had in it all the things she'd felt over the past months. The surprise of it, the specific unguardedness that had been growing in her since a rainy Tuesday night 4.5 months ago, when she'd knocked on a door with one shoe and mascara down her cheeks. "Are you staying?" Lily asked her. "For a little while," Avery said. Lily moved over, making room on the couch. Not a large gesture, just a small shift, a child making space, the same way she'd done on the festival bench, the same matter-of-fact assumption that this was where Avery belonged. Avery sat down. Lily was between them, which was where she tended to be. Not literally always, but in the shape of things, the center of the arrangement they'd become without planning it. "I'm at a good part," Lily said, settling in with her book. "Then read it," Nolan said. She did. She read aloud, because she had decided at some point that silent reading was less communal, and communal was better. And neither of the adults in her life had argued with this logic. Her voice was steady and expressive, and occasionally she added inflections that weren't in the text, but that improved it, in her opinion. The dragon, whose name in Chapter 11 was revealed to be Avery, a fact Lily read with complete straightforward neutrality that fooled no one, turned out to have been in the school gym for 3 years before the girl found her. She had been waiting, the book said. She just needed someone to look. Lily looked up when she read that line. She looked at Avery briefly, with the clear-eyed assessment that saw straight through to the point of things without ornamentation. Then she looked back at the book and kept reading. The apartment was warm. The February cold pressed against the windows and meant nothing inside. Edmund the fox watched from the shelf where he'd been relocated after the table, presiding with his usual diplomatic silence. On the wall of 4C across the hall, a horse ran in an open field in confident brushstrokes. Its legs finally right, the sky behind it wide and blue and unhurried. Nolan listened to his daughter read and felt the specific fullness of a life that was not simple and not unscathed and not without its freight. Grief doesn't resolve, it integrates. And some mornings that integration was more present than others, but was genuinely, unmistakably his. All of it. The loss and the recovery from the loss, and the slow, cautious, terrifying, necessary decision to let something new in. All of it was his, and he was glad for it in the complicated way you're glad for the whole of something rather than just the easy parts. Beside him, Avery Sterling, billionaire, insomniac, maker of oversalted soup, owner of one broken heel that still lived in the back of her closet because she hadn't thrown it away and wasn't sure why, sat on a second-hand couch in a small apartment and felt, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, that she was not between things, not moving toward the next version of herself, not building toward some future state that would finally justify the speed. Just here, present in the actual moment of her actual life, which was messier and more ordinary and more real than anything she'd ever built in a boardroom. That was the thing about belonging somewhere. You couldn't force it. You couldn't strategize your way into it. You couldn't buy it or construct it or position yourself to receive it. You could only leave the door open, which was terrifying, because an open door let in everything, not just the things you'd chosen, and trust that when the right knock came, you'd have the sense to step aside. She had knocked on his door because she hadn't wanted to be alone on a rainy night. He had let her in because she looked like someone who needed a soft landing. Neither of them had been looking for what they found. Neither of them had been ready. Neither of them probably would have described themselves as the kind of person this happened to. That was the part that didn't make the brochure version of love stories, not the grand gesture or the perfect moment or the clean declaration. The part that was actually true, that the people who change your life don't usually arrive when you're ready for them. They arrive on a Tuesday in the rain while you're making tomato soup, and they're holding a broken shoe, and they're already apologizing for being there, and you have a choice in about 2 seconds about what kind of person you're going to be. Nolan Hayes had stepped aside, and Avery Sterling had walked through. And the rest of it, the soup, the coffee, the kettle corn, the olive allocation disputes, the fractions homework, the horse painting, the dragon book, the festival bench and the December lights and the February dinner and the words said over pasta in a quiet restaurant, all of it had followed from that. One ordinary act of human decency on a rainy night had accumulated, increment by increment, into a life. Lily reached the end of the chapter. She lowered the book. Outside, the city made its night sounds. Distant traffic, the buildings settling, rain beginning again against the windows. "Good chapter," Lily said with professional satisfaction. "Very good," Avery agreed. Lily looked at the window. The rain on the glass caught the light and made patterns. She watched it for a moment with the quiet, contemplative attention she sometimes fell into, the ancient child version of herself, the one that saw clearly and said only what needed to be said. "It's raining like when you first came over," she said to Avery, not making it significant, just noticing. "It is," Avery said. Lily nodded slowly. "I'm glad you knocked," she said. The room was very quiet for a moment. The rain kept on. Edmund the fox held his position on the shelf. Nolan reached over his daughter's head and found Avery's hand. She let him take it. Lily, settled between them with her book and her blanket and Gerald, did not comment on this because it was simply part of the shape of things now. The shape of the three of them, warm and uneven and genuinely, imperfectly, unmistakably whole. "Me too, Bug," Avery said. "Me too."